Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So this is day 2 of Ramadan in the year 1443 Hijrah. This is the second short lesson, short reminder on the subject of Tawheed. In the first reminder yesterday, we looked at 3 or 4 points which can be summarized as follows. First of all, we mentioned that the excellence of a knowledge, the nobility of a type of knowledge, is based upon its subject matter. And the greatest type of knowledge is the knowledge regarding Allah and His Tawheed, because Allah Azza wa Jal is the greatest, and He is Al-Kabir, Al-Kareem. Therefore, the knowledge which pertains to Him is the most loftiest and the most noble of all types of knowledge. Also, this knowledge, secondly, is the asal, it's the foundation as it relates to, first of all, creation. Allah created jinn and men that they may worship Him. And it is the asal in terms of da'wah, calling to Allah. It's the foundation of the call of the messengers. And also it is the asal, the foundation for rectification, rectifying the servant and the land. And so that was the second point that we mentioned. Thirdly, we mentioned the meaning of Tawheed. We mentioned the linguistic meaning, wahada yuwahidu tawheeda, to make something one. And in the Sharia meaning, it is ifradullahi azza wa jal بما يختص به إفراد الله عز وجل بما يختص به في ألوهيته وربوبيته وأسمائه وصفاته. It is to single out Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, with what is unique and specific to Him, which is His uluhiyyah and His rububiyyah, and likewise in His names and His attributes, the perfection that He has therein. And finally, we finished by looking at numerous evidences from the Qur'an and the Sunnah as evidence for the meaning of this of Tawheed, the meaning of Tawheed, and likewise even the specific words where this particular verb and its noun is used, ila an yuwahhidu Allah ta'ala, and likewise even فَلَوْ كَانَ أَقَرَّ بِالتَّوْحِيدِ. These are very specific words which are used to show that the Messenger of Allah actually did use this language and these specific words. So in today's lesson, we are going to continue, and today we're going to speak about the aqsam, the types of Tawheed, the types or the categories of Tawheed. And we can start this topic by basically saying that as it relates to Tawheed, it is either in relation to ilm, it is either in relation to knowledge which is held, or it is in relation to amal, to action which is performed, right? So it is either knowledge that is held, meaning knowledge that you hold about is held, meaning knowledge that you hold about Allah, His names, His attributes, and His actions, right? So there's an aspect of Tawheed which relates to al-ilm, to actual knowledge. And what does that knowledge pertain to? What does it relate to? It relates to knowledge that you believe about Allah, His names, and His attributes, right? So this is Tawheed as it relates to ilm. And then as it relates to amal, to action, then that is you singling out Allah with all forms and types of worship, right? So Tawheed is either ilmi or amali, right? It relates to either ilm or it relates to amal. You see historically speaking, scholars like Ibn al-Qayyim, they said that Tawheed is of two categories. Tawheed is of two categories. Right? There's Tawheed which relates to knowledge, and there is Tawheed which relates to action. And there is various different names or labels. For example, Tawheed al-Ilmi, Tawheed al-Khabari, Tawheed al-Ma'rifa wal-Ithbat, Tawheed al-I'tiqadi. Right? These are all different terms that refer to the Tawheed, the aspect of which relates to knowledge that we hold and that we believe about Allah Azza wa Jal. And likewise, as it relates to the Tawheed of action, there are also numerous other names. There are also numerous other names. Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, Tawheed al-Ibadah, Tawheed al-Irada, Tawheed al-Irada, the Tawheed of one's intention and desire, Tawheed al-Qasd, the Tawheed of intent, Tawheed al-Talabi, Tawheed al-Fi'li, Tawheed which relates to action, Tawheed al-Amal. Right, so these are all various other labels that have been given to relate to the Tawheed of Amal, of action. Now, if we look at the first type of Tawheed, Tawheed al-Ilmi, or the Tawheed which is of al-Ma'rifa wal-Ithbat, right, which is the Tawheed of knowing Allah's names and His attributes and His actions. Now this can be further divided into two categories. So we can have the Tawheed that relates to Allah's names and attributes, and then we can have the Tawheed that relates to Allah's actions, meaning actions such as creating, giving life, taking life, providing, sustaining, and all the other actions that relate to Him creating and regulating and controlling the heavens and the earth, his creatures, right? So that would be Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, the Tawheed of Allah's lordship over His creation, right? So you can see that we started off by saying that Tawheed, we started off by saying that Tawheed has an aspect that relates to knowledge which is held, and then Tawheed has an aspect which is action, right? Which is to single out Allah in worship. And as for the Tawheed that relates to knowledge, we can divide that into two. That knowledge relates either to His names and His attributes, which is the al-Asma wa Sifat, or it relates to His actions, right? So here this would be al-Rububiyyah. So from this we see that Tawheed therefore is divided into three categories. This is something that is spoken of by there are scholars from the Salaf who spoke of this and who outlined this, such as Ibn Battah al-Uqbari, Ibn Battah rahimahullah ta'ala. He has words where he outlines these three categories, and these categories, as we shall mention from the statements of some of the scholars, they are derived from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So it's not something that something has innovated or fabricated, rather it is something that is very clear and apparent from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And so we'll start with a quotation from Al-Imam Abdul Aziz bin Baz rahimahullah ta'ala, and he said, وَأَقْسَامُ التَّوْحِيدِ الثَّلَاثَةِ, the types of Tawheed are three, those which we mentioned. He says, بِالْإِسْتِقْرَاءِ وَالنَّظَرِ وَالتَّأَمَّلِ فِي الْآيَاتِ وَالْأَحَادِيثِ. He says that this is known by way of al-istiqra, which hadith. He says that this is known by way of al-istiqra, which is comprehensively surveying and looking at and reflecting upon the verses of the Qur'an and the ahadith. And also looking at وَمَا كَانَ عَلَيْهِ أَهْلُ الشِّرْكِ, and looking at what the people of shirk used to be upon. When we bring all of that together, the Shaykh says, اتَّضَحَ أَنَّهَا ثَلَاثَةْ أَقْسَامٍ. It becomes very clear that Tawheed is of three types. اثنان أقر بهما المشركون. Two of them were affirmed by the pagans. Which were those two? Tawheed of Rububiyyah, Tawheed of Al-Asma'i was-Sifat. This is because there are very numerous verses in the Qur'an where the pagan Arabs, they affirm that Allah is the creator of the takes life, and all those other things, they clearly affirmed them. They also affirmed, his names, Al-Aziz, and so on and so forth. So this wasn't the point of dispute. The Shaykh then says, وَالثَّالِث جَحَدَهُ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. The third one was the one which the pagans, they disputed. وَقَامَ النِّزَاعُ بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ الرُّسُلِ فِي ذَلِكَ. This was the one about which there was dispute, which arose between them and between the messengers. وَالْقِتَالِ وَالْوَلَاءِ وَالْبَرَاءِ وَالْعَدَاوَةِ وَالْبَغْضَاءِ. Right? And so this was the one around which fighting took place, loyalty, disloyalty, enmity, and so on and so forth. These things arose around this particular type of Tawheed, the third type of Tawheed. Likewise, we have a statement from Sheikh. Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti rahimahullah ta'ala, and he outlines these categories along with some of the evidences. So he says again, وَقَدْ دَلَّ إِسْتِقْرَاءَ الْقُرْآنِ وَقَدْ دَلَّ إِسْتِقْرَاءُ الْقُرْآنِ الْعَظِيمِ, that a comprehensive survey and analysis of the mighty Qur'an has indicated على أن توحيد الله ينقسم إلى ثلاثة أقسام, that the Tawheed of Allah divides into three categories. First of all, he says توحيد الله في ربوبيته, the Tawheed of Allah in His Lordship. وهذا النوع من التوحيد جبلت عليه فطرة العقلاء. He says this type of Tawheed is what the original natural disposition of the intelligent people, of the uqala, it is what it has been molded upon, right? So this means that every person whose fitrah has not been corrupted knows inwardly, knows intuitively, without having to, reason or, use the intellect, but intuitively a person knows inwardly that there is a Lord and a Creator, right? And the Shaykh mentions the verse, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَهُمْ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهُ فَأَنَّى يُؤْفَكُونَ. If you were to ask them, if you were to ask the pagans, who created them, they will surely say Allah. So how then are they deluded? Right? So here the pagan Arabs affirmed, they knew their fitrah was not corrupted in this respect, that they knew that they had a creator and a maker. So this type of Tawheed is fitri, right? It is something that is intuitive and inward, and it's known without requiring any reason or deep reflection. So this is the first type of Tawheed. The Shaykh then says, the second Tawheed, توحيده جل وعلا في عبادته. His Tawheed, the lofty and majestic, in his worship, والضابط هذا النوع, and the principle regarding this type, هو تحقيق معنى لا إله إلا الله. Right, so the principle regarding this is to actualize the meaning of La ilaha illallah, right? To actualize, to put it into practice, and to affirm the meaning of this kalima and to put it into practice. La ilaha illallah. And he says, وَهِيَ مُرَكَّبَةٌ. This statement is composed of min nafi wa ithbat, from a negation and an affirmation. Obviously, the negation is that there is anything that has a right to be worshipped, and the affirmation is that this right belongs only to Allah. And the Shaykh says, وَأَكْثَرُ آيَاتِ الْقُرْآنِ فِي هَذَا النَّوْعِ مِنَ التَّوْحِيدِ. So the majority of the verses of the Qur'an relate to this type of Tawheed. Most of the verses of the Qur'an relate to drawing people and inviting people and directing people to this type of Tawheed, right? So pay attention. Most is not about establishing a creator, because that is fitri, that is daruri, that is something that's intuitive, it's natural, it's innate, it is necessary. And so most of the Qur'an is about directing people to worshipping Allah alone and abandoning the worship of other things. And he says, وأكثر آيات القرآن في هذا النوع من التوحيد وهو الذي فيه المعارك بين الرسل وأممهم. This is the one around which battles took place between the prophets and their messengers. He mentions a verse in the Quran, أَجَعَلَ الْآلِهَةَ إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا إِنَّ هَذَا لَشَيْءٌ عُجَابٌ. Right, so this is the response of the pagans, the polytheists. This is the response they gave to the messenger Muhammad ﷺ when he invited them to this Tawheed. They said, has he made all of the gods into a... Indeed, this is a strange affair, right? So they found it strange that they should be invited to abandon all of their gods and to worship only Allah, right? Because they used to worship Allah and used to worship other gods as well. So they were ordered to abandon all other deities and make their worship only for Allah alone. And then the third type, the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, توحيده جل وعلا في أسمائه وصفاته, which is the Tawheed of Allah, the mighty and majestic, in His names and in His attributes. And so he says this type of Tawheed is itself founded upon two principles or two foundations. And the first one is al-awwal تنزيه الله جل وعلا عن مشابهة المخلوقين في صفاتهم. The first is to free should resemble His creatures in their attributes. And so he said, ليس كمثله شيء. There is nothing which is as a likeness to Him. So this is a negation that in His attributes and His names, He resembles the creation. And the second principle is al-imanu bima wasafa Allahu bihi nafsahu aw wasafahu bihi rasuluhu. To have faith in whatever Allah described Himself with, or with whatever the Messenger described Him with, ala al-wajhi al-la'iqi bikamalihi wa jalalihi, in a way that befits and is suited to His perfection and His majesty. كما قال بعد قوله ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. Right, so after he said ليس كمثله شيء, there is nothing which is here. Right, so after he said ليس كمثله شيء, there is nothing which is as a likeness to Him, he said وهو السميع البصير. So he affirmed for himself hearing and seeing. He is the all-hearing and He is the all-seeing. And then the Shaykh rahimahullah said, مع قطع الطمع عن إدراك كيفية الاتساف, whilst at the same time we cut off all hope of ever being able to know how His attributes are. Right? So we can never have that knowledge. We do not know the reality of His attributes. And he mentions the verse in the Qur'an, Surah Taha, يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون به علما. They do not comprehend him in knowledge. So this is the statement of Al-Imam Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Shanqiti rahimahullah ta'ala. And we'll finish with a statement from Shaykh Al-Fawzan hafidhahullah ta'ala, and he likewise says تقسيم التوحيد إلى هذه الأنواع الثلاثة مأخوذة ومستقرأة من الكتاب والسنة. This division of Tawheed is taken into these three types is taken from a comprehensive analysis of the Qur'an, of the Kitab, of the book and the Sunnah. وليس تقسيما مبتدعا كما يقوله الجحال والضلال اليوم. It is not a categorization that is innovated, as is said, by the ignorant people and the misguided people today. By the ignorant people and the misguided people today. And likewise the Shaykh continues, وليس مصدر هذا التقسيم علم الكلام وقواعد المتكلمين التي هي مصدر عقائد هؤلاء المخذولين الذين يتكلمون بما لا يعرفون ولا من قبيل الرأي أو من قبيل الاصطلاح. So he then says, likewise this categorization that we have spoken of Tawheed into the two types or the three types, which is basically really the same categorization, he says it's not taken from ilmul kalam, right? So first of all, it's not an innovation, it's not a bid'ah, because this is the clear meaning found in the texts, right? That Tawheed has these aspects. So first of all, it's not an innovation. Secondly, he says this taqseem, this division, is not found from ilmul kalam, right? Where we try to figure out what Allah can and cannot be described with by way of our reason, by way of intellect, right? So this is not the source of this division either. It is not ilmul kalam, nor is it the qawaid, the principles of the mutakallimin, meaning those who engage in ilmul kalam. And you know, this type of speech, ilmul kalam, using rhetoric and reason and rationale and making the intellect to be the foundation of speech about Allah, His names, His attributes, this is really, it's not the way of the people of the Sunnah, it's the way of these people who are deserted and abandoned and who speak in affairs that they do not know. Nor is it وَلَا مِنْ قَبِيلِ الرَّأِي, nor is it from the this division of Tawheed is neither opinion. It's not opinion either. It's not anybody's opinion. This is not the opinion of a scholar amongst the scholars. Rather, as we established, this meaning is clearly taken from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And then he says, أو من قبيل الاصطلاح. Nor is it just something that's been defined by anybody. It's not just a matter of just defining the word. Right? Some people have got together and decided that Tawheed, has three. No, this is something that is very apparent from the Qur'an and from the Sunnah. And the Shaykh then gives a very quick illustration of proof from the very first chapter in the Qur'an. So he says, Allah Jalla wa Ala yaqul, Allah the lofty and majestic, he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa Iyyaka nasta'een. These opening verses of the Qur'an in the first chapter in Al-Fatiha comprises the three types of Tawheed. So the Shaykh says, Rabbil Alameen, Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of all the worlds. This is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. Then he said in the fourth verse, Iyyaka na'bud, Iyyaka na'bud. You alone do we worship. You alone do we worship. This is Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. And then he said, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. Right, so these are names, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Malik, Maliki Yawmiddin. Right, so this now is Tawheed of Allah's names and His attributes. So this is right at the beginning of the Qur'an. So this is right at the beginning of the Qur'an. And right at the end of the Qur'an, in Surah An-Nas, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. Right? So we find the same three categories. بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, Rabb, this is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. Malik al-Nas, Malik, al-Malik being one of his names. This is Tawheed of al-Asma wa Sifat. And Ilahi al-Nas, this is Tawheed of Uluhiyyah, al-Uluhiyyah. So this is just a quick illustration of two proofs from the very beginning of the Qur'an and the very end of the Qur'an, and in between there are many other proofs. But for the sake of brevity, the Shaykh, we can limit ourselves simply to these two proofs. And the Shaykh then goes on to explain some other additions which people have made to the categorization of Tawheed in which they have erred. And so the first of them is, some people have said that there is something called Tawheed Al-Haakimiyyah. Tawheed Al-Haakimiyyah, right? The Tawheed of Allah's right to judge. And this is, the Shaykh goes on to explain that this is not correct, and this is not so the Shaykh says that the division of Tawheed is not something that arises just by way of definition. Someone can come along and define it. Rather, it returns back to the Qur'an and to the Sunnah. And we know that the Salaf, when they spoke of Tawheed in this manner, in three types or three categories. And so therefore to add this fourth one is incorrect. And also this fourth one, Tawheed al-Haakimiyyah, we find that in the modern era, as happened in the past as well, that it's really the Khawarij and the people who want to revolt and rebel against the rulers. They bring this fourth categorization in order to allow themselves, the justification or the excuse to revolt and rebel against the rulers, because they make takfir of the rulers by way of this category of Tawheed. They claim that they have violated this category of Tawheed. They make takfir of all of the rulers, and so this is a mistake. And so this is a mistake. Likewise, also the Shaykh says some people have also added another category of Tawheed, and they call it Tawheed al-Ittibaa or Tawheed al-Mutaba'ah. And what they mean by this is that we make that we follow only the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And they call it Tawheed Ittiba'i Rasul. And this, the Shaykh says, وَهَذَا غَلَط. No doubt following the Messenger is true. However, following the Messenger is from the lawazim of Tawheed, right? Meaning it is from those things which follow on necessarily from Tawheed, but it is not an actual division of Tawheed itself, right? So this would be a mistake to make it a category of Tawheed. What relates to Allah Azza wa Jal and His actions, His names, His attributes, and His right to be worshipped. Tawheed is as it relates to Allah. But as for what relates to obedience to the Messenger and making him the one who is followed, then that is from the lawazim. It is from the things that follow on from Tawheed. And for that reason, it is from the lazim of the shahada. When we say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. We testify that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So to follow him, therefore, and to make ittiba of him is from the lazim of the shahada. Of the shahada for Tawheed. It is from the lazim of that. right? It follows on from that necessarily. It is not an independent, separate category of Tawheed, as some people have basically added this. And this is not necessary, and it is not correct. So this is from Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, from his book I'anatul Mustafid, his explanation of Kitab al-Tawheed. Inshallah, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. In today's lesson, we simply looked at the different categories of Tawheed and how it is either two types: Tawheed Tawheed al-ilmi, or Tawheed al-amali, that which relates to knowledge or that which relates to action. And this can then be further divided into a further two types: Tawheed of Allah's names and attributes, or the Tawheed of Rububiyyah. Both of them relate to knowledge. And the third one, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, then that is the same as Tawheed al-Amali. So this is how the scholars have explained this issue from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. It is not an innovation, it is not kalam, it is not from opinion, it is not from linguistic definitions. Rather, it is the actual realities indicated in the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So with that, we'll conclude our short reminder on Tawheed for today, the second day of Ramadan. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.